Hello, good morning. It's 6 o'clock on Tuesday, the 26th of February. I'm Maya Even and you're watching TVAM. The main news this morning, the White House says the land offensive will continue despite Baghdad radio's announcement late last night that Iraqi troops have been ordered to withdraw from Kuwait. The United Nations Security Council is, or has just concluded, we believe, its emergency session at the request of the Soviet Union. We'll bring you news from the UN as soon as we have it. And the weather. There'll be some sunshine in central and eastern parts of England after a misty start. It'll be cloudy with showers over the rest of Britain. Now let's go over to Beatrice Hollyer in the TVAM newsroom for the first national and international news of the day. Good morning to you, Beatrice.
Good morning, and good morning. The news from TVAM on Tuesday, the 26th of February. The White House says the Gulf War will go on, despite reports that Saddam Hussein has ordered his troops to withdraw from Kuwait. Baghdad Radio announced last night that Iraq would leave Kuwait, complying with the United Nations Security Council Resolution 660. But the Americans say Iraq has broken promises before, and they'll take the offer seriously only if Saddam announces it personally and publicly. This morning, Baghdad Radio has made no further mention of the proposed withdrawal. The other overnight headlines from the Gulf: the United Nations Security Council is in emergency session at the request of the Soviet Union, which is considering putting forward a proposal for a ceasefire. The Americans say that 27 US Marines were killed in the Iraqi Scud attack on a military camp in eastern Saudi Arabia. And a Scud missile was fired at Bahrain. No one was injured. Our first report is from our United States correspondent, David Foster.
After the Baghdad radio announcement, Mr. Bush met with his war cabinet for more than an hour. His spokesman later said that as far as the White House was concerned, nothing had changed.
We continue to prosecute the war. We have heard no reason to change that. And because there is a war on, our first concern must be the safety and security of the United States and coalition forces.
For the first time, the White House demanded that Saddam Hussein himself, publicly and personally, make any statement about withdrawal. That would be the only way to convince the coalition of his seriousness. Mr. Fitzwater also said there is no evidence that the Iraqi army is, in fact, in retreat.
In fact, Iraqi units are continuing to fight.
However, he said there would be no more fighting if the Iraqis did, in fact, lay down their weapons.
We will not attack unarmed soldiers in retreat, but we will consider retreating combat units as a movement of war.
Mr. Fitzwater, speaking for the president, dismissed the latest Soviet attempt at the United Nations to broker a peace settlement. Delegates arrived for a late-night meeting of the Security Council, including Iraq's ambassador, who said his country would table formal notice that it intended to take its troops out of Kuwait.
Well, I am going to reaffirm Iraq's commitment to withdrawal from the Kuwaiti territories. We have said that several times, but we are also aware that some members of the coalition, particularly the United States and Israel, have a hidden agenda against Iraq. They would not be happy to see a ceasefire or total withdrawal, a peaceful withdrawal from Kuwait. They are not interested in Kuwait or in peace or, for that matter, resolution of Security Council.
The White House pointed out that the president deliberately timed his remarks for the moment when members of the Security Council would be beginning their meeting. He wanted to make it plain, it was said, that a peaceful solution could only be reached if Iraq agreed to comply with all Security Council resolutions on the Gulf, not just the one concerning withdrawal. David Foster, TVAM News, Washington.
As the war continued overnight, the United States suffered its heaviest casualties so far when a Scud missile hit a military building in Dhahran. Overnight, the British 1st Armoured Division has clashed with an Iraqi mechanized brigade, according to a US military source in the Gulf. More details are expected later. For the latest developments, we now go live to our reporter Paul Newman, who's in Dhahran in Saudi Arabia.
Well, yes, Beatrice, good morning from eastern Saudi Arabia, where despite those pronouncements from Baghdad, the military commanders here have made it absolutely plain that the ground offensive will continue. Of course, it's now in its third day, and the Allies are predicting a victory within a matter of days. The White House, of course, has dismissed the Iraqi offer of a withdrawal, and Kuwaiti exiles here believe it's only a matter of time now before the Iraqi occupation is ended.
Well, I think this is a defeat, and this is a surrender. He has to surrender or make it very clear that he wants to withdraw and submit to all UN resolutions.
But just 5 hours before the Baghdad radio announcement, Iraq launched its most deadly attack of the war to date here in eastern Saudi Arabia. This dramatic amateur video shows the moment a lone Iraqi Scud missile plunged into a 2-story billet housing more than 100 US servicemen. As ambulances rushed to the scene, eyewitnesses said the initial explosion was followed by a second blast. The compound, which housed reservists from the Army Transportation Battalion, was completely destroyed, killing at least 27 American servicemen. 98 were wounded, and a number are still unaccounted for.
I saw a guy covered in blood up there who had pulled 4 people out.
What was the condition of the people he pulled out?
He said they were dead.
This was the deadliest Scud attack of the war, and American military officials say the missile apparently broke up in flight, spreading debris over a huge area. And the very latest information here following a military briefing is that British armed forces believed to be part of the 1st Armoured Division were involved in fighting early this morning. No further details are available at the moment, but we are expecting more later this morning. This is Paul Newman, live for TVAM News in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia.
Well, our chief reporter, Jeff Mead, has been with Allied armoured units as their push into Kuwait continues. He sends this report on their progress and on the trail of destruction left by retreating Iraqi troops.
The laying waste of Kuwait begins at the wrecked customs sheds on the border crossing just above Kafji. From there, the straight road stretching 60 miles to Kuwait City crosses a landscape of destruction. There's not a building undamaged, nor a power cable intact. The highway itself's a graveyard of vehicles, military as well as civilians. All were destroyed in the air war and in the ground fighting of the past 2 days, as Allied firepower thwarted the enemy's intention of turning this into a killing ground.
We're 2 miles inside Kuwait now. Half of the dual carriageway road leading north has been ploughed up and then sown with anti-tank mines, part of the defences Iraq was never able to use.
Another obstacle, deep trenches cut into the road itself, and further on, oil-filled ditches, but these much-dreaded flame traps were left unlit. Since the road was secured, it's become the key supply and reinforcement artery for the mainly Arab forces fighting northwards, and it's a constant stream. This mobile battery of Saudi howitzers racing the Kuwaiti armoured personnel carriers, their crews eager for victory on what was their national day.
What is surprising, given the amount of damage Allied aircraft were claimed to have done, is just how few of these burned-out Iraqi tanks we've seen. 4 is all today.
Smoke on the horizon indicated where some Iraqis were ineffectually shelling their attackers, others were surrendering. 6 junior officers and over 100 soldiers were brought in for processing in half an hour. They looked tired but otherwise well. The Saudis said 500 had given themselves up that morning, prompting one colonel to speculate the war could be over by Thursday.
The morale is going down.
From the early pace, the Allied advance had clearly slowed too, with troops awaiting the next stage of the attack. Following Saddam Hussein's announcement of his army's withdrawal, it wasn't long in coming.
And the Saudis are determined to be among the first Arab forces to liberate the capital. This is Jeff Mead for the British television news pool inside Kuwait.
The Prime Minister is expected to give his response to the announcement of an Iraqi withdrawal in the Commons later today. The government and opposition leaders remain sceptical about Saddam's intentions. We now go live to our political reporter, Ray Alexander, who's in Downing Street.
Well, sources here indicate that whatever Saddam Hussein does, the UN resolutions call for long-term peace and security in the Gulf, and that's being interpreted as meaning much more than just an Iraqi withdrawal.
Mr. Major believes the safety of British forces is his priority, but also that Saddam must not linger behind his borders as a continuing threat to security. It's a view shared by others.
If he wants to get out of Kuwait, of course we must let him do so, but I would be strongly opposed to him getting out with his armour. That should be required to be left behind.
He must accept the Security Council resolutions, accept the conditions laid down, the reasonable conditions laid down by the Allies, and at the same time he must not pose a continuing threat to Kuwait or to any of his other neighbours in the Middle East.
If the military action ends, the political difficulties will begin, and they could be complex. Today in the Commons, Mr. Major and other MPs, including those who have been opposed to the war, will deliver their response. Ray Alexander, TVAM News, live in Downing Street.
Other news, the Birmingham Six go to the Court of Appeal on Monday, expecting to be freed from prison within weeks. The Director of Public Prosecutions yesterday announced their convictions were no longer safe and satisfactory. The men were jailed for life for the 1974 pub bombings, in which 21 people were killed and 162 injured. Catherine Holloway reports.
Family